So this guides me to a question I wanted to ask you about vendor selection because related to this software topic, I think selecting the right vendor would guide you through this decision far better than if you made an inferior decision on a vendor, right? So let's say a salesperson walked into our listeners' office and they gave a very compelling pitch and good feelings, but then now what, right? Like what are some things that our customers should ask a potential vendor to cut through that noise of the sales pitch and know that they'll be supported properly?
It's interesting and perhaps counterintuitive, if you will. Me personally, I trust the vendor more when they tell me uh, everything to be concerned about, and to some degree, everything that can go wrong, which is counterintuitive to sales. But if I have someone on a sales side who's telling me, it's easy, okay, right there, that's a red flag. Because it's just not. And, when I look at vendor selection, there's two parts. There's the front end part on the sales, like, okay, were they candid and transparent and really vested in trying to make sure it's a success versus a sale. And I would say and suppliers who are more transparent on the challenges, their end goal is a successful installation and not the sale. And then the second part, when it gets into execution and things go sideways, which they always do, did that supplier step up and say, yep, you know what, this is on us, and we're putting the resources to address it and move forward. Because that's what separates suppliers, if you will, is when it does go sideways, do they step up? And in the sales process, are they transparent on challenges that are going to be there to make sure that everybody is prepared for them, to make sure that at the end of the day, it's a successful project.
Serving on the integrator side of the coin yourself, you probably hear often that 24 months seems to be the magic number for a return on investment. Sometimes a little bit less, but oftentimes the 24 months. Do you feel that that is a realistic, achievable number? And what we've been talking about leading up to this question, it sounds like there are maybe more costs, like hidden costs that may not be so apparent on that, that bottom line item price that you get from the automation provider. There are other forces at play, or there's labor that goes into right, even the planning and the restructuring a process to be automation friendly. So, is that 24 months achievable in your experience? And if so, what are some specific considerations that may be less intuitive or obvious for our listeners that they should consider in their ROI models?
The whole ROI topic, I think, is interesting, and many times, depending on customers, what they consider or don't consider. And I'll give the example. Many times, whenever someone thinks of automation, they think of reduction of labor, which is true. But there's also uh, more consistency in delivering of orders, and what is that worth? And being able to support your customers more, what is that worth? And then there's just even general construction cost. I've always found it fascinating that many years ago that there was a lot of automation of library systems, and people would look at that like, how can you have any ROI in library systems? And it's compelling. And the entire ROI was driven by construction cost. That the cost to build a conventional library with 8-foot shelves, costs X amount, or if you automate it, it costs Y, and it's just significantly cheaper. So whenever there's an ROI discussion, it's a comparison. And I think that is where sometimes people don't necessarily view it correctly, because they will create a higher threshold for the automation and not have a parallel path for doing it manually. Because many times in a manual operation, it may not even be achievable, because they'll say, all right, we want to build this and it needs to do this. Okay, this would cost that much. How would you do that manually? And many times, um, the building, let's say, isn't even large enough. Okay, well, what's the cost to now go to outside storage, and what's the additional labor to handle all that? So with any type of ROI discussion, you need to make sure that it's truly an apples to apples comparison, number one.